Hey Room 202, today we're going to be talking about finding percent increase and decrease of problems. Go ahead and take a look at your learning intention and success criteria. This is what we're going to be working on for about the next 3 days, very focused, and then this will be kind of lingering throughout our project that we're going to start on Thursday. So our learning intention says that we understand that percents can be used to describe change when looking at proportional relationships in real world situations. Tonight, you only need to focus on the first two success criteria. Man, I have trouble reading today. Can you tell I've been on winter break? So the first thing says, I can identify if a problem is a percent increase or decrease. So when you look at this example from going from $5 to $10, you need to know that the money increased. And we're going to be looking at how to find that this was a 100% increase. Then you need to be able to actually find what the percent increase or decrease is. So how did I know it was 100%? So in this example, we went from 20 books to 15 books. You should see that we went down. So this is going to be a type of decrease. And I'm going to explain where all these numbers come from, but what happens is we find that this was a 25% decrease. Later on this week, we're going to then be able to find the markup or markdowns of items. So let's just kind of dive into this. Please go ahead and open up your math notebook to page 46, where we are going to begin. The first word that we're going to talk about today is percent of change. And percent of change is just a ratio. And it's a very specific ratio. And it's the ratio of the amount of change to the original amount. So the example I want you to write down is right here. It says amount of change over the original amount. You're going to notice that the ratio we're going to be working with is in the form of a fraction. There will be no non-example. So once you have this down, you can go to the next word, which is percent of increase. Now, a percent of increase is when something obviously gets bigger or increases, and it describes how much it increases through a percent. So here's the example you're going to write down. When I go from $10 to $12, we can use a percent of increase to describe this, and we would say that it was a 20% increase. Tonight, we're going to be working on how do we figure out what this 20% is. Where did this number come from? Again, there will be no non-example, so let's go ahead and go on to the next and final word of this evening. The next word is percent of decrease, and instead of describing how much something increases, we are now describing how much something decreases. For example, yes, you are writing this down in your notebook. Going from 125 pounds to 110 pounds, the number went down or decreased, and we're going to figure out how to find what percent decreases or this is, which it is in fact a 12% decrease. Once you have that all done, we don't have a non-example again, we're going to be taking some notes on page 51. And again, I'm going to apologize for any stuttering I am doing. I got to get back into the groove after having a couple weeks off. I'm sure you understand. So, at the top of page 51, we have steps. And we're going to need to be looking at these carefully. So the first thing you have to do is decide, is the number increasing or is the number decreasing? This is going to be important for how you write your answer because you need to make sure you're describing if it's a percent increase or a percent decrease. Now, what we have to do then is to find the amount of change. How much did it increase or how much did it decrease? You're going to hear me say AOC a lot, and AOC just means amount of change. And what we do is you take the bigger number and you subtract the smaller number, and that gives you how much it changed. Then we're going to substitute the values into a ratio, and the ratio is going to be what we just saw in our math notebook, the amount of change over OA, what I like to call the original amount. And this is what we have in our vocabulary for percent of change. You should also see it underneath step 5 in your math notebook. If I were you, I would highlight it and box it and star it and make it pretty and stand out. Now this is where we get kind of confused. You should see it says divide, and then I added in red, which you can write down, is to or multiply. Because here's the deal. Sometimes when we're given this ratio or fraction, we're going to have to divide to turn it into a decimal and then a percent. Sometimes we can just multiply the top and bottom, or the numerator and the denominator, to get 100 in the bottom, which a percent is out of 100. So if we divide, then we have to go to step 5 and convert our decimal to a percent. If we multiply, we are done. And I know you're probably going, this is confusing. I think it's just going to be easier to see it. So let's look at some examples. This is number 1 on your paper, and it says from, where's my pen? There we go. From 5 minutes to 6 minutes. So the first thing I want you to know is it says from 5 minutes. What this means is that 5 minutes is our original amount, and I want you to do this in your notes just as I'm doing it on the screen. Since I went from 5 to 6, the numbers went up. So this is some type of percent increase. And I'm going to set this up because this is where my answer will go eventually. So I did step 1. I determined if it's an increase or decrease. I went from 5 to 6, so I went up. So this is an increase. Step 2 says we have to find the amount of change, which is simply the bigger number. In this case, 6 is bigger than 5, minus 5, which is 1. Step 3 in your notebook says substitute the values into the ratio. Well, remember, to find the percent of change, we take the amount of change and we put it over the original amount. So here's what I do. I take my amount of change, which is 1, and I put it over my original amount. Going back to the problem was 5. Now I have 2 options. I can divide. I can put 1 in the house, and I can divide it by 5, and I can get a decimal and then turn that decimal into a percent like we did in class today. Or I can go, hey, a percent is always out of 100, and I know if I multiply 5 by 20, I'm going to get 100. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. And so 20 out of 100 is simply 20%. So my answer to this is that going from 5 minutes to 6 minutes is a 20% increase. And this is my percent of change. Let's look at another one together. So this says, going from, example number 2, $20 to $11. For a couple things I want you to notice. I'm going from 20, so this is where I started, or this is going to be my original amount. Since I went from 20 and I went down to 11, this is going to be some type of percent decrease. So when I'm finding the percent of change to describe this problem, I'm describing a decrease. So I'm going to kind of skip step 2, which says to find the amount of change. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to my ratio of amount of change over the original amount. And I'm going to kind of combine step 2 and 3, and maybe you'll think this is a little bit easier. So here's my ratio I use to find my percent of change, in this case my percent decrease. To find the amount of change, you take the bigger number. Well, when I look at 20 and 11, 20 is bigger. And I subtract the smaller number, and I put it all over the original amount. So I get 20 minus 11 all over 20. Well, I have to do my subtraction. 20 minus 11 is 9, and I keep my original amount on the bottom. Now, step 4, you can divide 9 divided by 20, and you can get a decimal and turn that decimal into a percent. Or you could be like, hey, 20 times 5 is 100. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 9 times 5 is 45. 20 times 5 is 100. And 45 out of 100 is just 45%. So this problem shows a 45% decrease. And that is my answer. I want you, if you're getting kind of confused, I want you to jot down some questions that you're either going to put on Google Classroom for me and your classmates to answer, or to answer in class tomorrow. We have 2 more examples. So let's take a look. This says, Example number 3, find it in your math notebook on page 51. From 5 points to 25 points. Again, I'm going to find my original amount since it says I'm going from 5 points. This is my original amount, and I'm going up to 25. So this is going to be some type of percent increase. So the percent of change I'm looking at will be an increase. And yes, I know I'm being redundant. I'm sorry. So I take my ratio, the amount of change, to the original amount. The amount of change is when I take the bigger number, 25, right here from the problem. I subtract 5, and I put it all over the original amount. I started with just 5 points. So then I do it. 25 minus 5 is 20, all over 5. And some of you are going to be panicked right now because, oh my gosh, it's an improper fraction. That is okay. Going from 5 to 25, that's a pretty big jump. So we're going to have a very big percent increase. Look what's going to happen. You could divide 20 by 5 and take that and turn it into a percent. Or, this is working out super friendly if you haven't noticed, I can multiply the top and bottom by 20. And if I do that, I would get 400 out of 100. And when we have a ratio comparing to 100, this is just a percent. In this case, we have a 400% increase. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can have a percent that is greater than 100. That's how you get more or extra points or extra credit on tests. If you look at the stock market, you'll see large percents like this a lot. It can happen. Which makes sense. 100% increase would be going up to 10 points. We went way more than just 10 points. All right, to 10 points. I shouldn't have said that. I hope I didn't confuse you. I am rambling. Last problem. Good thing you guys are the only one who will see this. How embarrassing. Example number 4. I'm sure some of you, Miss Soto, are making fun of me right now. We have from 150 books to 100 books. This is my starting amount or my original amount. I am going down. So we are looking at some type of percent decrease. There it is. So I take my ratio, the amount of change, and I put it all over the original amount. This is just the ratio I use to find a percent of change. I take the larger number, 150. I subtract the smaller number, 100. And I put it all over where I started, which is 150. 150 minus 100 is just 50. All over 150. Now look, we need our denominator to be 100. I don't know how to make 150 into 100 easily. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to simplify, and I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 50. Normally I wouldn't do this, but since you guys are in my honors class, I'm going to show you this little, not shortcut, but extra step. So 50 divided by 50 is 1. 150 divided by 50 is 3. Some of you might recognize this fraction as it's going to be a repeating decimal. If I take 1/3 and I divide it, 3 goes into 1 0 times. I add my decimal and 0 placeholders. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. And you're going to notice, hopefully, immediately that this is going to be a repeating decimal. So here's the deal with repeating decimals. In this case, you want to look at directions. Does it tell you to round? In this case, it doesn't tell me to round. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it into a decimal, or I'm sorry, a percent, using the shortcut, which is multiplying by 100 or moving the decimal 2 times to the right. So this becomes 33.3 repeating percent. I don't want to sit and do the dot, dot, dot. I don't want to write a million threes. I don't have any instructions to round, so I'm going to write it exactly like this. So I can say that this is going to be a 33.3, make sure you put your repeating sign over the decimal 3 because that's what's repeating, percent decrease. This one might cause you to think a little bit, but just make sure that you're going through the steps carefully as you go through some problems on your own. The other thing I want to point out to you is you should notice the amount of change, the top number in your ratio, is always a positive number. If you get a negative here, you're doing something a little bit wrong. So here's your job and the homework you have tonight. On page 51, there are 4 problems under the words your turn. Your job is to do them. Tomorrow in class, we will discuss this and we're going to continue practicing this because it can be a little tricky and it's very important for our project. So I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope you have a good night. Adios.